Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to be talking about something pretty big in the automotive world.
You mean the possible Nissan-Honda merger?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
pretty massive deal, right?
Yeah.
Two giants potentially joining forces. And we're going to be taking a deep dive into some recent commentary on this merger from someone who really knows this industry inside and out.
Right, right. Someone who has, well, actually been in the driver's seat, so to speak.
Exactly.
Okay.
We're talking about Carlos Ghosn, the former CEO of Nissan. And, he's known for basically turning the company around. But when it comes to this merger, well, he's got some reservations.
Yeah, he doesn't seem too convinced. I mean, I think his main concern boils down to, well, how much overlap there is between Nissan and Honda.
Yeah, their product lines, the markets they target.
Yeah.
It's almost like, trying to blend oil and water. Can these two companies with such similar offerings really integrate smoothly?
I mean, it's a good question, right? It's easy to think, oh, two big companies plus two big companies equals mega corporation. But, just adding things together doesn't always work, does it?
It's way more complicated than that. You've got different company cultures, supply chains. What about the products that might be competing with each other? I mean, just the logistics of all of that. Integrating it all, it could get messy.
Absolutely. And, the source material we're looking at today, they use a really good analogy here. They talk about like two amazing musicians, each at the top of their game in totally different genres. Just putting them in the same band, well, that doesn't mean you're automatically going to get great music.
Right. You might get a clash of styles. It
Mm.
could just be a complete cacophony.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what Gosen is worried about here with Nissan and Honda.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's saying it's not about individual talent. It's about creating a unified sound, a shared vision. If they want this merger to work, both Nissan and Honda, they got to be on the same page about, where they're going and how they're going to use their strengths together.
And, this is where things get even more interesting, right? Because Gosen isn't exactly close to the action at the moment. He's in Lebanon,
Yeah.
thousands of miles away from Japan.
Yeah, that's right. So, is that distance a good thing or a bad thing? Does it give him a more objective view? Or does it mean he's missing out on important details?
It definitely adds another layer to all
Yeah.
of this, right? Like, how much does his current location influence his perspective? But okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here. What are Nissan and Honda actually doing to make this merger happen?
Well, they've signed what's called a foundational agreement. Basically, it's like a roadmap for how this merger is going to play out. And part of that involves Honda buying back shares, which is pretty typical in these situations. They're talking something like 1.1 trillion yen. It's a huge amount.
And the end goal.
The end goal is to have a new holding company, so a parent company that owns both Nissan and Honda, and they want to have this listed on the stock market by August 2026.
Wow, that's a tight timeline.
It is. And, the stakes are super high here. Because if this works, if they pull it off, they could be the third largest car manufacturer in the world.
Right.
Right behind Toyota and some of those Chinese companies that are really coming up fast.
That's the potential upside, right?
Exactly. But the risks, I mean, they're huge too. If this integration doesn't work out, it's wasted resources, missed opportunities. It could even damage both brands.
And this is where Gosen's skepticism really comes in, right? He keeps saying that a good merger, a successful merger, it's built on a strong foundation.
Mm.
And he's worried that, rushing into this without a super clear plan, it's like building a skyscraper on shaky ground.
Yeah, I see his point. It's not enough to just smash two companies together and cross your fingers. Integration, it's a process. It's a complicated process. And they need to be very careful about how they do it. They've got to think about all the little details.
Absolutely. Each company has its own way of doing things, their own culture, their own goals for the future. So, okay, we've talked about the potential problems. But what about the potential benefits here? What would a successful merger look like?
Well, I mean, just imagine the combined power of their research and development teams. They could really push the boundaries on things like electric vehicles, autonomous driving, all these innovations that are changing the car industry.
Yeah, and if they can pull it off, if they can combine their expertise, their manufacturing, their reach, I mean, they could really become a force to be reckoned with.
They could be a real powerhouse,
Yeah.
leading the way in the industry. But like we've been saying, it's a big if.
And Gosen's perspective, I mean, it's important to remember that he's not just some random critic. He's been there, done that, right? He's seen what can go wrong.
Exactly. And he raises a really important point. How do you get two companies that have always been independent, that probably have very different ways of doing things internally, how do you get them to work together smoothly?
That's a fantastic question. And on that note, let's turn to you, our listener. What do you think? Can Nissan and Honda overcome these challenges?
Yeah.
Can they create something truly great together?
You want to hear your thoughts?
I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the hype, the idea of this mega merger.
Yeah.
But as we've been talking about, there's so much more to it than just, like, numbers and market share.
Right, exactly. Like we were just saying, it all comes down to this idea of integration.
Integration.
Yeah, integration. So basically, it's how you combine two companies, like all their operations, their cultures, even their employees. After a merger, you got to bring them together. And it can be a huge undertaking, especially for companies with, histories and ways of doing things like Nissan and Honda.
It's almost like, merging two families. You might have similar goals, values, but there are always going to be differences, right, in how you approach things.
That's a great analogy. Like, think about it. When families merge, maybe you argue over whose holiday traditions you keep or how to, discipline the kids. But with companies, it's more like product strategies or marketing approaches.
So how do you avoid those clashes? How do companies like Nissan and Honda, how do they increase their chances of a successful integration?
Well, one thing they can do is learn from the past. Look at other mergers, both the good and the bad, and see what worked and what didn't. And I think a key takeaway is the importance of something called due diligence.
Due diligence.
Yeah, it's basically investigating the other company like really thoroughly before the merger happens, trying to identify any potential risks or even opportunities, kind of like, getting to know your partner's family really well before you tie the knot.
Makes sense. Don't want any surprises popping up later down the line.
Exactly. So you're looking for, I don't know, hidden debts, maybe some big cultural differences that might cause problems, or maybe, business strategies that clash. You want to minimize the risk and make sure both companies are going into this thing with their eyes wide open.
So it sounds like communication is key here. Transparency.
Absolutely. But it's not just about that. Leadership is huge, too. You need strong leadership to guide the whole process.
Someone to take charge.
Exactly. They need to set a clear vision for what the new company is going to be. They got to address everyone's concerns, especially the employees. And sometimes, they got to make tough decisions. And it's not just about, like, making decisions. It's also about bringing everyone together, building a new culture that incorporates, the best parts of both companies.
Right. It's about creating that sense of unity, that shared purpose.
Yeah. Like, remember that music analogy? You need a conductor to bring all those talented musicians together and make sure it sounds good, not just a mess of noise. That's what good leadership does in a merger.
And, it's interesting because even Ghosn, even though he's skeptical, he does think this merger could work. He just keeps emphasizing that they need a solid plan, a shared vision. Do you think that's possible? I mean, for companies like Nissan and Honda with all that overlap, can they really achieve that kind of cohesion?
It's a tough question. It's definitely a challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. One thing they could try is focusing on specialization. So instead of competing head to head in every single market, maybe they each pick areas to focus on, areas where they're strong. Like maybe Nissan focuses on electric vehicles and Honda goes all in on those fuel-efficient hybrids.
So they're not like stepping on each other's toes.
Right. It's about working together to expand their reach, not just, fighting over the same piece of the pie. It's about using their combined expertise, their manufacturing, everything to become even stronger. And I think that's the key, right?
The whole being greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. But even with the best strategy, it takes time. Integration, it's not a quick fix. It's a long-term process.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. And, we keep talking about the human element here. And it's true. Mergers can be really stressful for employees. There's uncertainty, maybe even anxiety. So it's super important to keep those lines of communication open, address any concerns people have, and just provide support to help them through the transition.
Because at the end of the day, it's people's lives we're talking about.
Yeah.
Their careers.
Exactly. And I think if Nissan and Honda, if they really want this merger to work, they need to put their employees first. Because a successful merger, it's not just about making money. It's about creating a company that's thriving, something that's sustainable for the long haul.
It's pretty clear, that whether this merger works or not, it depends on a lot more than just the numbers, right?
Yeah.
But we've been talking about all these factors, like how they integrate, how much research they do beforehand, leadership, the people involved. It's a lot to juggle. It's not simple.
It really does feel like almost like a gamble, doesn't it? Like the payoff could be huge, but there's a real chance they could lose big too. That's a good way to think about it. Big risks, big rewards. But I think what you're saying is Nissan and Honda really got to do their homework. Like a good gambler, they got to figure out the odds, make a plan, and be ready for anything.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I want to turn the tables a little bit. Ask you, our listener, a question. What do you think is the most important thing for Nissan and Honda to keep in mind as they go through with this? What advice would you give them based on everything we've talked about?
Yeah, what should they be focusing on? How can they avoid those risks,
Yeah.
create a company where everyone's on the same page, and really become a leader in the car industry? What do you think?
And that's kind of the beauty of these deep dives, isn't it? We're just scratching the surface here. The goal is to get you thinking, to spark your curiosity, and hopefully get you to explore these topics even more on your own. Because, even something like a merger, it can be fascinating when you start digging deeper.
So, yeah, keep asking those questions, keep learning, and who knows, maybe you'll come up with some ideas that could actually change the car industry.
That's all for today's deep dive. Until next time.